What's the weirdest thing you've ever witnessed that you can't explain to this day? Story 1. I was home alone watching TV. I had it running through the stereo. Suddenly, it starts getting louder. I look at the stereo and the volume is counting up. I had it on 12, it's currently on 18, 19, 20, counting up at a steady pace. I think to myself, duck, I'm sat on the remote. I raise my arse from side to side to find the remote, but it's not there. 33, 34, 35. The TV is now incredibly loud. I glance to my left just in time to see the remote drop from head height down onto the arm of the sofa. Story 2. My mom and brother and I are sitting in the living room watching TV. Out of nowhere, this thick black fog, about 3 feet in the air, maybe 3 inches thick, spread across the center of the room. We all stared at it, and it looked back and forth between each other, confused, and it disappeared maybe 20 seconds later. We all saw it, acknowledged that we all saw the same thing, and that it was bizarre. About 2 months prior to this, we were robbed. Well, we assume, but they stole my pink Converse low tops, my mom's gold cross necklace, half of the money in my brother's wallet, and a few of my dad's work shirts, which say his company name on them. It was a bizarre combination of things to realize were missing in the morning. Reply: they took half of his money? What did they think he wouldn't notice? That is bizarre. Story 3. My friend and I gained an extra 15 minutes or so going to class one night. I think I've told this one on Reddit before, but anyway, it was March 26, 1997. We remember the date because it turned out to be the day the Heaven's Gate cult committed mass suicide. My friend and I took a class together at a local community college, so she would come to my house at 6 p.m., hang around for a few minutes, and we'd head off to our 6:30 class. She gets to my house at 6. We watch The Simpsons until the first commercial break, as we always did, around 6:10. We leave the house, both of us remembering seeing the dashboard clock in her car showing the correct time. It was about a 15-minute drive to the school. We get to school around 6:25. I hang around for a minute with friends who've been smoking outside and then head in. We sit down in a fairly empty room. The clock in the classroom says 6:10, but we assume it's wrong. My friend's watch says it's nearly 6:30. As we'd expect it to be, we wait. Eventually, people start trickling in, and class starts 20 minutes later. We're wondering what the hell is going on. My friend checks her watch a little while later in class, and it's now showing the same time as the classroom clock. Once class was over, the dashboard clock in her car is the same as her watch. We have no idea what happened, and neither have really heard a good explanation from others as to how we appear to get out of sync with everyone else. Reply 1. The unexplainable part of that story for me is how you willingly only watch the first 10 minutes of The Simpsons. Reply 2. I had something like that happen to me. I showed up to work an hour early because of it. It wasn't daylight savings time or a defect in my alarm because my car clock had the same time as well. It was truly weird. Story 4. A few years back, I taught English in Copenhagen. The school was right in the center of the city, just off Struget, for those who don't know CPH. And as with most days, I was ambling towards my class one sunny afternoon. I was about 100 meters from Radisplassen, the Danish equivalent of Liker Square, or Times Square, when I heard someone loudly ranting. I turn around and there's a really short guy, red-faced, wearing a suit. He looks like an angry leprechaun, ranting and raving, and he's clearly in a huge hurry. I notice he has something in his hand which he's pointing towards the sky. Going by my instinct that this guy is an absolute lunatic, I'm expecting to see either a gun or a Bible. What I see is a device about the size of a 1980s mobile phone. The angry leprechaun approaches a junction, he points the device to the sky, presses the button, and the traffic lights immediately change. At first I convince myself it must be a coincidence, but he repeats the trick 3 times, absolutely speeding along pavements and across roads. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and yet no one else on the street seemed to even notice. 3 years on, I still can't decide if he was some Bond villain who loved gadgets, a crazy inventor, or an actual magical leprechaun. Reply: he was probably just someone who liked to tinker. There were actually sensors on top of traffic lights that were designed to look out for emergency lights patterns. Most of the time, you could fool the sensors by taking a strobe light, placing an IR filter over the lens so people can't easily see it flash, and timing it to match the timing required to set off the sensor. Some cities found out that this was being done and changed to sensors that required a specific pattern. something that could be reproduced with a microcontroller if you were so inclined. My guess? He built himself a device to trigger the emergency sensors. Story 5. I was at the beach with my friends when a 1970s limo pulls up and parks abruptly. An old man in a tracksuit hops out, think like 75 years old, and starts jazzercising in the parking lot. I was impressed with his mobility because he was really moving. Story 6. Standing in line at a convenience store behind a pair of EMTs, a college student and a father in his 40s with 2 kids, I witnessed in quick succession the college student nod to the dad nod the kids nod to the cashier nod to the EMTs, followed by them all leaving together through a service exit. I was told to go to the next register. Story 7. Absolute oddest thing that ever happened to me that I think would have been a delusion if I hadn't been with someone at the time. It was around 1998-1999. I was with a high school group and we were attending a conference of some sort at Portland State University. Our teacher had split us up into groups of 2 and we were assigned different presentations we were supposed to go see. We got our list of presentations and the time they were being held and sent on our way. Me and my classmate Jacob were to go to the 2nd or 3rd floor to go see a talk on invasive species in Oregon, so we looked at the map and found the room we were supposed to go to. We decided to take the elevator since we were both lazy and wanted to avoid the crowd on the stairs. So we get into the elevator to go up to, I forgot if I was on the 2nd or 3rd floor. I believe the 3rd, as I think we started out on the 2nd floor. Once we got off, we were definitely in the same building, but everything seemed duller, and there was no one anywhere. The entire place looked like it was from the 60s or something. Nothing had been updated, and there were entire areas blocked off and taped up and dusty. All the doors leading out of the small area we were at, and when we got off the elevator, were locked and the windows were black. We couldn't tell if there was black paper taped all over the windows or not, but we couldn't see anything through the windows on the doors. Looking out the windows on the street, we saw cars, but no people anywhere. Keep in mind, this is in the middle of Portland, Oregon, so there should be hippies all over the place, but not a soul was seen. I finally found a door that was open and went through, but the whole building seemed to be abandoned. So I went back to the elevator and met Jacob, who hadn't seen anything more than I did. At the time, there were several hundred people at PSU for this conference, so the 3rd floor should be buzzing with activity, but we saw nor heard a soul. You couldn't even hear the activity downstairs. Jacob had a very uneasy feeling and I agreed we should probably go back downstairs. So we got back on the elevator and got off on the 2nd floor where we came from, IIRC, and we were back. Bright lights, a bunch of people all over the place. We looked at the map again and found the location for our assigned presentation, and it said it was up 1 floor from where we were. So this time we took the stairs. We found ourselves right where we had been, but everything was shiny and new, updated and looked like new paint. None of the doors were locked and there were people everywhere. Looking outside to the street, the hippies were in full frolic. I have no idea where Jacob and I went that day on the elevator, but it was probably a good thing we came back. Story 8. I was on a cruise to Mexico. My husband and I were sitting in our balcony drinking wine and enjoying the stars. Out of the sky, a huge ball of fire, way too big to be a shooting star, comes crashing down, landing somewhere in the distance. Out on the ocean, it was pitch black, save for the stars, and there was no landmark to lend perspective, so I have no idea what it was or how far away it was. The rest of the night I kept waiting for a giant wave to capsize the ship. No one else we talked to saw it. Reply 1. Probably space junk burning up in the atmosphere. Happens all the time, but you were lucky enough to see it. Reply 2. It was a shooting star. There's no limit on how large they can be. They are just usually smaller on average. I've seen some huge ones that lasted for up to 4 to 5 seconds. Was it green perhaps? These are really rare, but they exist. You're lucky. Story 9. When I was a kid, I lived in North Florida near a military base. I was outside playing basketball when I heard a jet plane fly over. There's nothing unusual about this, as all sorts of military traffic flies about all the time. However, this jet, an FA-18, was chasing what looked like a Mercury capsule. This was in the early 90s. No idea what the hell that thing was following after, but I'd never seen anything like it. Reply. It was probably a refueling cone from a larger plane. Maybe you just didn't see the other plane. They trail a good distance behind. Story 10. Me, my brother, and a friend were camping once when I was maybe 11 or 12, way out on our 100-acre farm in a small town, Kentucky. I woke up around 1:30 or so in the morning and could faintly hear a piano being played that sounded like it was coming out of the woods about 100 yards from our campsite. There is not a house or building or anything anywhere near that spot on our farm. So naturally, I think I'm just hearing things and decide to try to go back to sleep. Then my brother, who was apparently also awake, sits up and asks me if I hear a piano. We made a dash for the house and never camped out there again. Reply 1. Reminds me of my own ghost story. I'm not a ghost believer, nor am I a hard skeptic. I'm not really into it either way. It was spring break, but it's Washington State, so it's still very dark and cold. A few of us stayed in the dorms most of the week, maybe 7 of us total. One night, we're in one of the rooms. I'm on one end, my buddy is on the opposite end, and 2 girls are chilling on the floor, dead in the middle. Suddenly, we hear this horrific screaming, screeching sound. My buddy and I are freaked out. We both describe it as a mix between a human scream expressing terror and nails on a blackboard. The girls between us didn't hear a thing. Reply 2. That was me. Sorry about that. Sometimes I accidentally sit on my own balls. Reply 3. I've lived in the forest all over North America, and normally woodsy animals make some unexpectedly horrifying sounds. Foxes, mountain lions, elk, lynx, and other stuff all make a huge variety of really scary noises. Story 11. I worked at a movie studio in Burnaby where they filmed Stargate SG-1, and on my very first day of work, I saw Richard Dean Anderson, MacGyver, down on one knee taking a picture of a black lab taking a dump. I found that to be a little odd. Story 12. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I were sitting at our tiny bar table in our tiny San Francisco apartment consuming a home-cooked meal. We lived in the outer Richmond district, which operates at a considerably slower pace than the center of the city, thus is consequently dead silent for the most part. All of a sudden, our soft conversation is abruptly interrupted by a shattering bang and flying shards of glass. Apparently, a decorative glass plate, which was given to my girlfriend as a going-away gift, spontaneously exploded into hundreds of uniform-sized bits. The plate was just sitting on the kitchen counter. It hadn't dropped, nothing had touched it. It was almost as if the invisible man had shattered it with his invisible hammer in order to scare the shit out of us. I still have no clue how or why it exploded. Very, very strange. Reply. Most people don't realize that many glass objects have a great deal of mechanical stress in them due to the contraction they undergo when cooling. There's an annealing process that they normally go through to try to get rid of the stress, but it doesn't get rid of all of it. This can later lead to the object breaking just as you describe, although it is usually precipitated by at least a small thermal or mechanical shock. Corning used to make a popular line of dinnerware that was a glass-like ceramic. It is famous for doing this, but it liked to shatter into razor-sharp shards. Some consumers didn't care for that. Story 13. I was in the Boy Scouts when I was younger. The summer of '97, we were on our way back from a campout. Our modest troop was in a 15-passenger van with a U-Haul tow behind trailer. I was in the middle seat, sitting up on my knees, talking to the person sitting behind me, my cousin, when all of a sudden, he just fell asleep, as well as the 2 kids sitting next to him. I looked down at the kid next to me, and he was also asleep, and the van was upside down and I was thrown to the ceiling. It was right side up again, and I was slammed back into the seat. And lastly, it was upside down again, and this time it hit hard. I had glass in my mouth and felt like every bone in my body was broken, but I sat up after a minute and watched someone crawl out through the window, so I followed them. When I got out, I was in ankle-deep water. We had landed in a ditch at the base of a hill that the road was on. I couldn't see the person I had followed out of the wreckage. I climbed the hill, losing my shoe in the process, and stood in 70-mile-per-hour traffic, and 2 cars slammed on their brakes to avoid me. A woman stepped out of the first car and was screaming her head off at me before she realized I was all tore up and there was a van in the ditch. Then she immediately ran back to her car and pulled out a car phone. Later at the hospital, numerous doctors and nurses asked me to repeat this story over and over and over again. I had to tell this story. It wasn't until later that I found out everyone else was trapped in the van with broken bones and 1 kid died. I was the only person who escaped of my own power, and I didn't have a scratch on me. I still don't know who or what it was I followed out of the broken window. Edit. The cause of the accident was a faulty tire, a firestone that blew and pulled us off the road. Also, they never explained why all of the kids suddenly fell asleep except for me. Reply. I'd guess, based on personal experience, that what actually happened with all the other kids suddenly falling asleep was that they were all knocked out on the first impact, and you, for whatever reason, weren't. Maybe because you were in the middle seat, where I assume there was no headrest, or the way you were sitting. I was in a car accident where everyone, EMTs, tow truck driver, parents, etc., was expecting a dead person when they saw the scene of the crash. So I can vouch for the strange, slow motion, WTF is happening, shit, I should do something to fix this sort of feeling that happens during the actual accident. Like you have time to actually contemplate the situation, but it doesn't occur to you what is happening and you can't do anything to stop it, because it's obviously happening very fast in reality. My car only rolled 1.5 times, I think, ended upside down, and luckily, I got knocked out on the first roll when the top hit the ground by hitting my head against the headrest or ceiling or something, because that, along with my seatbelt, is probably what saved me. Being unconscious kept me from tensing up and effectively worked the same way as a drunk driving accident. The drunk people often walk away with nothing but bruises and scrapes because their body was so relaxed, if I understand correctly. Story 14. I worked at my college's bowling alley for 4 years. One day, we had a Chinese student with a heavy accent come in, get shoes, and start bowling. He would react to every one of his tosses. "Oh, gutter ball," up to "strike number 7," complete with a little dance. Yes, he kept count of his strikes throughout the night, but seemingly paid no attention to his score for each game for those curious. At one point, he shouted, "I love bowling," and one of my coworkers fell out of his chair laughing. He stayed for hours and was apparently having the time of his life. I didn't mention, but this was also our weekly free pizza night, complete with red pin bowling, which got him even more excited. When he was done, he returned his shoes, collected his student ID, declared, "I'll be back tomorrow," excitedly, and left. We never saw him again. Thus concludes the legend of Super Happy Bowling Guy. We don't know who he was, what happened to him, or why he never returned. Reply. His parents found out because they've set a tracking device on his phone, told him to stop ducking around and go back to studying. Source. I'm Asian, and my mom did try to install a tracking device on my phone once for my safety. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, then make sure to like and subscribe. Also, feel free to comment any video idea you would like us to cover next.